Welcome. Thank you for coming to learn a little bit about test coverage and a little bit about a package that might be able to help you with it. So as Jillian mentioned, I'm currently working as a data engineer. The firm is called Community, and it's like a one-to-many texting platform for celebrities. So if you see like Tom Brady giving out his phone number, it's not his real phone number, it's our app, and he's using it to communicate with all his fans. So it's a cool little company, and we were really lucky in that we got to build the data analytics stack from scratch. And obviously we use dbt because we love it. Yeah, I'm always available on Slack, in the dbt Slack. If you have questions, if you want to reach out or just talk, would love to do that. I started my career as a data analyst, so it informs a lot of what I do now in data engineering in terms of thinking about analysts as my sheep to be herded and protected and helped, and hopefully really to understand like the things that they need in their workflow to make it more efficient and more enjoyable. And yeah, huge dbt evangelist, pretty much saved my life as an analyst. Like two years ago, I was like, oh my God, we have a billion queries all saved in like random places. They're all terrible. How do we like make this into something that works? And dbt's the best answer that I've seen for solving that and building really reliable transformation layers. Yeah. What can you expect to learn from today's talk? We're going to learn how to make the analysts do exactly what you want. I'm just kidding. We're actually going to show you how you can ensure that your project is tested and has tests on it, as well as it is documented to whatever degree makes sense for you and your project, rather than just enforcing very broad blanket rules on all your analysts. You can implement these piecemeal at a pace that makes sense for you. The inspiration for this package started about 2 years ago. I was tasked with basically ensuring we had primary keys on all of our models in our BigQuery warehouse. And that was fine to implement over a couple days. But what I noticed is that there was a lot of back and forth with the rest of the team, the analysts and the data scientists, as they would be submitting their work to improve the models or work on the models. And there was a lot of back and forth in the PRs like, oh, that's nice, but like you forgot a primary key. And then it's like an extra day for them to realize that comment is there and then to go and add it and then ping the engineer again and get the review again. The idea for giving analysts a tool to check their coverage before they submit the PR and reduce friction was born. And yeah, we're finding a healthy balance between these two sort of goals. One, data engineers like models to be tested. They like to be confident in the integrity of the data. You might want referential tests, checking that the grain of the data is not changing between one transformation layer to the next. You probably want a unique key on every model. Lots of different things that you might care about to ensure that your models are working as intended. But data analysts and data scientists sometimes forget to do those things, and that can cause slowdown in what your team is able to produce, as there's little back and forth and little nitpicks on PR. So my philosophy on this is that if there is an expectation around something in the quality of your project, the best thing to do is to codify those expectations and make them visible to everyone on the team so that they have a clear understanding of what is required of them when they're working on the project, and they have a clear way to check if they're meeting those requirements. So with all that sort of background, I'm going to show the dbt-meta-testing package, which I wrote. And this package is a dbt package that you will install the dbt dependency. And the purpose of the package is to check, first to codify the expectations of your project, and then to provide a simple way for you to check them, either developing locally as an analyst, as an engineer, or in a CI, and preferably both, so that people can check something locally and ensure that it meets all the required expectations. And then they can push it and the CI will test it, and there won't be any surprises. They'll be like, this passed for me, and it passes on the CI as expected. And therefore there's no friction around nitpicking a PR for more tests or more documentation or anything. The way that this package works, as I mentioned, it's all written in Jinja, it's all written in dbt, so you don't need any other external dependencies in your project. It's on dbt hub, so you simply list it as a package, pin the version that you want, and run dbt dependencies, dbt deps, and it will load. The way that this package works is in your dbt project, you essentially have these two additional configs that you can apply to pass along your project. So one is required docs, which is just a Boolean. And the other is required tests, which takes a dictionary. And so the really beautiful thing when writing this package was the realization that dbt already has a great system for creating hierarchies of configuration. So say you want to apply something broadly across every model in your project. That's why we have these configuration paths. That's why they're so great. So you can really just say require docs every model. And then if you want to whitelist something, we're piggybacking on that natural configuration hierarchy that dbt gives us, because you can just go into the individual model and change the config to be whatever override you want. And then you can put a note about that in the PR, right? You can say, I'm whitelisting documentation here because this is whatever, a temporary thing. It's going to be deleted tomorrow, whatever. So you can flag it and really take advantage of that hierarchy in the model. For those of you who have ever seen this package before, checked out this page, there's also a really cool update that I just built. So there's a new version, and what it lets you do is it lets you test the tests that you are applying to any model based on regex keys. Let's go. Yeah, so here, for example, in the past, you just had to list a specific test and the number of tests, the number that you wanted of those tests to be on a model in order for it to pass basically a macro that will be run against to validate the configuration. Now, there's the option to introduce regex keys. So you can give an or, I want a unique test, or I want a not null test, and I want one of them. Or I want any 4 tests, any 3 tests, whatever you want. So there's this new nuance that allows it to be very granular in how you want to assert coverage on your project. Maybe in some model paths, like in your marts, you want at least like 4 tests on every model. Maybe one of them has to be like a relationship test, unless that's explicitly overridden. So I'm really proud of how much control this gives you over your project. And what I want to do for you now is demo how easy it is to get started and get running with this and apply this to your package or your project, sorry, as well as give you like more of a sense of how it is actually going to check these configurations. So that's maybe not so abstract as it might be. So that'll be clarified in just 1 second. So if I go, okay, let me resume sharing on this new screen here. Cool. So what I have here is a brand new dbt project. So just created by running dbt init earlier this morning. And
possible for you to zoom in a little bit?
Yeah, totally. Let's go there. We can do one more.
Much better.
Nice. Thank you for the shout out. So yeah, this is a brand new dbt package, and I just want to walk you through how you can start using this. This is a brand new dbt project, and I want to walk you through how you can start leveraging this package to test and assert rules for the documentation coverage and the test coverage that you want on your project. So if you do, I'm just going to make a new file, packages YAML, and just going to go over to hub and copy that. Cool. And so I've added this YAML. For anyone not familiar, very new to dbt, this is how you install an external dbt package like dbt-utils. So that's all you're doing here, just listing the package name and pinning the version. And then we can install this with, let's do a clean first. And then cool. So it installs the package. So now let's check out the models. These are the stock models that are created when you create a new dbt project. So let's take the second model here and add a new column. Call it new, and it's just a constant, the string. And from here, I'm going to run the whole project to create that new model with the updated column in the database. So I set my environment variable to point to a profile from another location, and I'm just running this on a Snowflake instance right now. Cool. So it created the two models there. And so really testing and asserting configuration. Asserting configuration, I'll show you first, is as simple as doing dbt run operation and let's say required docs. Okay. So all I'm doing is a run operation. I'm calling the macro name. Again, in the package, there's really only two macros that you apply this way. One is required docs and the other is required tests. So I just run this. It's going to run and it's going to pass. And the reason it's going to pass is because although I don't have any documentation on my new model, I actually haven't required any documentation on my model. So if I go to dbt project and I look at my models path, I haven't applied the configuration to require documentation. So say I want to do documentation on all models in this project. I'll just do required docs, true. Okay. And now let's run it again. And you're going to get an error now because it's now actually calling out to the warehouse and checking for documentation coverage. It checks for columns that exist in the warehouse that do not have, that are not even spec'd out in the YAML. It checks for columns that are spec'd out in the YAML that have blank descriptions. And it checks for models that are spec'd out in the YAML that have blank descriptions. And it'll highlight what exactly is the problem. These are missing from the model YAML. So my second model, a new column, and I haven't specified it. So if I go to my schema here, and my second model, yep, and I add we'll say hopefully a good description. Cool. So now let's run it again. And we can see that it's all happy. It says, nope, you've documented everything you're supposed to document. So you're all good. So this kind of shows how easy it is to get up and started with this package. It's really just a dbt dependency. It's something you can run in your dbt cloud instance because it's just a dbt run operation. And it's something that you can get your analysts used to running locally, as well as give them context into what's expected at different levels of the project. Because again, you can put these configuration requirements at any depth in the model hierarchy. So for example, let's, as an example of how to say the test coverage, requiring test coverage, let's say that we are going to have a new path. Yeah. And on that new path, we're going to say the required tests are unique. You have to have 3 of them, which is a lot, but we'll just say that for now. And here, let's make a new folder. We'll call it marts, and I'm going to put my second model into that folder. So now I have 2 different paths, the example path and the marts path. And although they're all being spec'd out in this schema, I'll just move that. So now, same thing. All I've done is added a configuration to my model path. And to assert that my models meet that configuration, I'm just going to run the corresponding macro. So run operation required tests. So this only ran against my second DBT model because I moved it to the marts path. And this configuration is only required on models in the marts path. And so if I look at the schema here and I go to my second dbt model, I can see that I'm providing one unique test, and it's saying this model failed. It expected to meet this key unique, and only one of the tests on this model met that key, and it expected 3 of them to meet it. So it fails. And this is actually an error. And so this is a non-zero status. So if you're running this in a CI, this will fail. It'll return 1. Finally, this is the kind of new cool feature with the regex matching. You can be creative about what tests you want to require. You can union a couple different requirements. So say on the marts, I'm going to say, instead of unique, I'm just going to provide the any match for regex here. And I'm going to say 3, which is basically saying I want 3 tests on all these models. They can be anything, but I want 3 of them. And we'll run it again, and it will fail because we only have 2. So what we can do now here is add another test, or we can revise our configurations. Let's say we want it to be either unique, and then this is more regex, or not null, and match 2 of them. And let's test that. And it passes because the 2 tests on this model, this is checked against the regex, it passes. This is checked against the regex, it passes. And therefore 2 of them meet the criteria, which is required. So this is really, yeah, this is all this package is. And go back to the slides here. The benefit for this package is really that you don't need to introduce additional dependencies to your project. It's just more DBT. So you just install it as any other DBT package. You have really granular control over how you want to require documentation and tests on which models on which paths. And I think it's simple enough to use. This is really like meeting that analyst sort of criteria and optimization, is that it's simple enough to use that an analyst can get familiar with running that macro locally on their work before pushing up their PR and then not being surprised. And as I mentioned, although an analyst can just run the macro locally, in my opinion, the best way to set up a development environment for your team, for your analysts, is to have some kind of CI check that is ideally in a script that can be run locally the same as it's going to be run in the CI. And that really avoids any questions of, why did this work on my computer, but now it's failing in GitHub, and what's the difference? And I don't know. And the answer, so in my opinion, the answer is to whatever you're checking and running in GitHub or in any Git client you're using, you should make that script runnable in the local environment for the analyst. So as an example, this is fully just the CI script that we use at Community. And this is just a bash script, and our analysts know how to call the bash script, and it basically runs through every step, and there's no surprises for them when it's running in CI. And you can see in the bottom here, we actually require docs on everything. So nothing, you wouldn't know that, but we are running the required docs macro, and in our configuration, we require docs on everything, and we require at least a not null and unique test on every model. And this really just shows how easy it is to insert these into a script to have it be run. Again, if it does not meet the configuration, it will fail and the script will fail, which is good locally and good if you can also have the same script running in CI. And yeah, I'd be curious to hear about your guys' use cases, your guys' problems, but I hope that this has shown you that there is a little bit of tension in the development process between analysts trying to get things across the line and not knowing what's fully expected of them, not knowing if they're meeting the criteria. And so I think being really clear about those expectations in code, getting everyone who works in the project to know where they can check them and understand them, which is in the dbt project YAML, and then giving them the tools, i.e. either just running the macro or more ideally running a script that pretty much mimics the CI locally. Giving them the tools to test those takes away a lot of that friction and back and forth that can ensue in a PR down the road when people are nitpicking and saying, why don't we just like add a couple more tests here? So we found that it really speeds up our development process. Our analysts understand why their stuff fails. It's good. It catches me all the time. I like forget to add a description for a new column that I've added to my models. And then I'm like, oh yeah, should have run that before I pushed it. And yeah, so we're really happy with just keeping everything fully documented and feeling confident in the level of testing that we are checking for on our models. So I hope that this is useful to you guys, and I hope that you find it does the same for you. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Teghan. That was great. We've got a couple questions here, and it looks like more coming in. So, Bastian, I'm going to kick it over to you if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, sure. Cool. You can hear me, right?
Yeah.
I've had a few microphone problems today, so I'm a bit. Yeah, so first of all, actually, this is super cool. I really love the way that it doesn't require anything else than dbt. And I'm totally going to steal your idea about enforcing tests for a similar tool that I demoed a while ago. Jillian had a question. So yeah, really cool. My question was actually, is there a way when you actually, maybe now I'm thinking about it, it's maybe a silly question, but the question was like, do you have a way to maybe also say whether the tests that are added are passing or not? I imagine you would just run dbt tests and you would get an answer. But so maybe that's a bit of a non-question anymore. But is there a way to chain it and then make it called as you've added the test? Or I was just curious about that. But yeah, maybe that's a silly question. So sorry for using the time.
No, I think I hear what you're asking though. Like, how do those work together? What's I guess the order of operations? Hopefully, this wouldn't override. You have 3 tests; they didn't pass, but we're still going to let you merge. Probably not, right?
Yeah, I think that you're totally right. That is the domain of dbt test, and all this is very specific to it's meta testing. We're testing if you have tests.
Yeah.
All this is really trying to do is just assert the coverage. And so that's the reason why I really recommend creating a bash script in whatever CI you're doing that will run all the steps that are necessary, including if I go back here for a second, yeah, here. So you can see we're doing everything, right? We seed, we do a full refresh on incremental models, then we run changed models, then we check for docs and tests. The reason we check for docs and tests later is because we want to run the models to have them on the warehouse so that required docs can call out to the warehouse and get all the columns that exist. So it knows if you're trying to sneak through something that hasn't been created in the warehouse yet. So it creates the column, and then it's like, oh, this column exists, but you didn't document it, and it fails. So yeah, really, that's the reason for creating this full sort of step script, and then being able to run it locally just really helps analysts feel confident because it's the same as what they're going to be tested on in the CI.
Yeah, super cool. Yeah, so the flow would be you run your model, it's exposed in the database, you assert, and then you modify stuff, and then you test.
Yeah.
You run tests, and then you get all of your answers.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Really nice.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Can't wait to use dbt again.
Awesome. Thanks, Bastian. Josh, you've got a question. You want to come off mute?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, again, I think this is a really awesome package, and I'm looking forward to being able to use it. But my question is around Slim CI and whether there's any interplay between that and what the package is testing.
Yeah, there is actually, because I realized that not everyone wants to all of a sudden one day require all documentation on even just a subset of their model paths, and maybe they just want to eat the elephant sort of one bite at a time and kind of just make sure that whatever's being altered is meeting the requirements that are now in place. And so the way that works is in the package, it's actually slightly hacky, but it's kind of cool. It's a really cool use of dbt list. So the run operation, both macros, require tests and require docs, they take an argument called models, which can be a subset of models that you want to test. So even going back to like our example earlier, remember we had the Mart's model path, and say we in the Mart's model path require tests, like any three tests on everything in that model path. But every time we run this, we don't necessarily want to enforce that on all those models right away. We want to do it piecemeal. We want to only enforce it on the change models that are coming in through the CI. So the answer there, you can't always limit what is being checked with a space delimited list of models like this. But the cool answer for state selection is the dbt list command lets you pass in state modified. And so that will just list the models that would say, like, you're running dbt run with state modified and stuff like that would run those models. Dbt list just lists out their names. And when you put that in a subshell command here, that's what this little tidbit here is, you are running that command, getting those list of models, and then putting them as a space delimited string as the argument to the models keyword. So that basically will allow you to only test against a subset in Slim CI if you're looking to do that.
All right, cool. We just had another one come in from Gary Tucker. You want to ask your question?
Sure. Yeah, basically, it may not be related, but I figured since you've done this, you probably have something else for this. So what do you use to assert or enforce formatting in your dbt models for your different analysts or data engineers?
I'm sorry, I missed like the key word of that sentence. What?
Yeah, so formatting, like different, if you have different formatting rules for your code, like they have to be formatted a certain way, they have to be written a certain way. How do you assert that? Is there something you guys have in place to do that currently?
So for formatting, SQL Fluff is I think, becoming the tool that is great for doing that. It's really cool, it's really powerful, and it does have some options for auto formatting as well, which is really nice. I really like it. I think it's really cool. For us, it's not quite there yet to a point where we're using it in production and enforcing it for our analysts. And part of the reason why is we use VS Code to develop in dbt. And we really there's a plugin that uses SQL Fluff to lint and highlight all the errors in VS Code. And we really want that to work as expected before we force our analysts to conform to a style, because we want them to be able to see like in their editor as they're developing, oh, I can see these are problems and I have to fix them. We want them to see that visually. So we're just waiting for that VS Code plugin to get to that state. But yeah, definitely check out SQL Fluff. It's such a great tool, and it's pretty powerful for asserting things. And you can do things in your CI in a script like this that would say, assess the quality of the SQL, and maybe not even make sure that it's perfect, but make sure that it's like better. I think there's diff coverage is like a tool that makes sure that it's at least an improvement on what was there before, rather than it like meticulously checks every single formatting rule. So yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Awesome. Gary, I don't know if you saw, but I dropped the link to SQL Fluff if you aren't familiar with it. So you can check that out in the Slack. Okay, let's see. I didn't see any other questions from anyone else yet. We'll give people time. I've got a few myself. Though you might have answered them at the end there, Teghan. I'm curious. It looks like you're setting configuration for all models to require documentation and testing. So my question might be moot at this point. But it did sound like you mentioned analysts are allowed to override that. I'm just curious if analysts are responsible for configuring at some layer, like they have power to configure whether or not the model that they're working on requires a test, or the model that they're creating.
Yeah, good question. This isn't like impenetrable by any means, in the sense that really all that this relies on is just defined in the DBT project YAML based on where you're putting these configurations in the model path. And so like at any time, an analyst in their PR could just delete one of these lines, and then, but that kind of defeats the purpose. Like then there would be a conversation in the PR like, hey, I see you edited the DBT project YAML and you just removed the requirement for tests. No, that's not actually what the point of this is.
Yeah, have you seen that? That one seems egregious, but that got me. The next question I had, because I was trying to figure out how to word it, is at what phase in development are testing and documentation standards established, and what criteria are you evaluating? When you think about testing, it sounds like you've got that blanket one that's required across everything, but I didn't know if you have some sort of, I don't want to say rubric, but like guidelines around, like when you would want to have more tests versus not.
That's a good question. The thing that I've really been noticing about testing, and that I'm actually going to probably implement with this package shortly, is I really want more insight into the changes in the grain and the transformations that are occurring between, like in the shape of the data between each model. I think that I've seen projects where like a model it's say like orders, and you have order ID, and that's carried through 3 consecutive models without really changing its shape. And I just think that having more visibility and trust into carrying those similar shapes and similar grains between transformation layers is pretty important, because I think that's where the most like nefarious problems creep in, is when you are selecting from something that you assume that uses like order ID, and in the previous layer it was a primary key and it was unique, and then now it's fanned out because it's joined on users or something in this next layer. And that might be okay, because that might be intentional, but you have to define that's what's happening in that layer and codify it. And yeah, I'm really thinking of applying broad tests like this and saying require like a relationship test, maybe like with any follow-up. So it could be relationship or relationship where, as well as there's like the dbt utils cardinality test could be useful for just assessing if all the IDs at least exist in the same like order in 2 different models. So yeah, that's really like where I see the power of this coming in, is making people declare on each model in the tests what exactly is the purpose of this transformation. Why is it changing what the previous data is? How is it useful? Instead of just being able to select star from previous model and select star from the other one and like interjoin them, and you're like, yeah, okay, that's fine, but like, why are we doing this transformation right here, right now? What is its purpose? So thinking about those things, and that's like in service of generally trying to keep the DAG really conscious and precise, because I've seen projects where it just gets very big, because the fastest route for an analyst to get something is not necessarily to like think about how that thing comes from the source to the like end model that's consciously designed. The fastest way for them to get it is just select the thing I need from the source where it's new and left join it on the most bottom downstream like model where I need it now to expose in Looker. And so trying to prevent people from being able to do that and making those like big long leaps in the graph is something that I think could be cool, and I'm interested in exploring with this package in terms of forcing like referential declarations between transformation layers.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that is what you're showing there, not only requiring like that there are two tests, that it's counting two of them, but it's specifying what type of test. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yeah, it's saying, I don't know what exact, like I'm not sure. I would just run this. Yeah. I'm not sure. I don't think you need maybe you do need the dbt-utils. But yeah, this is really just saying dbt-utils has a relationship where test, I think. So maybe you want to give people the option to either specify the relationship like one-to-one, or do a where they filter out some of those. So that's what this does. It's just like at the first part of the test has to match relationship and then something else. It could be just relationship, or it could be something else at the end. And then also a cardinality, or sorry, this type means or, so it's or match a cardinality test. And I need two of those. And so typically they would have to do both, because you probably wouldn't declare two relationship tests.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, that's very cool. Just laughing, I saw Bastian. We've all done it. Guilty of going to the let's just get it from the source. He said that in the Slack. I think everything you described sounds familiar. The last question I had, which I teed you up because you started answering it. I'm just curious, like what features you're planning to build in the future, what you're getting excited about. Obviously, I think you just answered it, but anything else?
Yeah, I'm really, what I'm working on today actually, which is cool and I'm excited about, is we want to sometimes expose and maybe anyone who's done this in the community right now is listening, would be great if you want to talk about it, but we want to expose like some SLA information about the last updated at for sources downstream in children models. And we want to do it just with a macro that you can just put on the model as a column, and it will actually use the graph object to figure out for that model, what are the like most parent sources, and then query the information schema and insert those values. So yeah, we're looking at doing that because we think it's useful to expose on our BI layer that this thing has not been updated by an external vendor for 24 hours. So although our jobs are running like every hour, it's not getting new data, and people just need to have visibility in that to understand what's going on. So yeah, looking at writing a macro like that, be happy to share with the community. And the other thing is documentation. Right now we have a script that parses the graph and extracts all the columns that already have descriptions, and then generates a YAML file and autofills it with all those descriptions based on those columns already existing in an upstream model in the graph. And so I think it's a shell script though. So I think it'd be cool if we could turn that into pure DBT functionality as well. And you could do something like, I know there is let's go here. Something like documentation. There is a documentation package already. So maybe like beefing that up to not just produce the skeleton of a YAML file, but actually autofill it with descriptions that already existed for columns that have already been defined in the model elsewhere, as well as the tests so that you can run it idempotently over and over again and not delete your YAML file.
Cool. That sounds familiar. I don't know if Bastian, if he's still on. That sounds like similar functionality to what he presented at the last DBT How To. I'm not. Bastian, are you on mute?
Yeah, it is. But yeah, we've done this, but we've obviously not. So it's a package that we demoed actually, a go called dbt sugar, but it's like not a dbt package. But yeah, no, maybe there are some ideas that we could collaborate. I actually sent you a DM for this because yeah, it does have the idea. Like the main reason was like if you have a column called order ID in one model, it should mean the same in all of your other models. So we basically generate like via a bootstrap task, which is like, okay, you have this column called order ID, let's steal it from all the other models and homogenize this kind of stuff. But anyway, I don't want to steal the thunder on this. So
no, yeah, I just wanted to make sure.
No, that's super cool.
But we can talk. I do
let's talk about it.
Like the fact that the thinking of doing it as a dbt package, because it makes the friction to install it and use it much smaller than the route that I ended up taking. Yeah, idea.
Cool. Yeah, let's talk. Let's check it out.
All right, we have another question actually came in, which is awesome. Anthony, do you want to come off mute and ask a question?
Yeah. So my question was with respect to data tests. Like if I stick a test in my tester, is there any way using the meta testing to count that towards either my required number of tests, or I suppose what I'm more interested in is if I write such a test, it's usually pretty unique and I definitely want it to stay around forever and make sure it always exists. Is there any way to enforce that with meta testing?
As of the new release 0.3, there is. So now the regex keys test against schema tests, custom schema tests, and data tests. If you had a macro that you wrote and it had data test and it was called my data test, you can require it in the YAML and it will fail if every model in the marts, in this example, in the marts path does not contain the test. So that's like the caveat or the shoulder shrug is that you can check that you have the test, but at the same time, because this is more useful when it's applied broadly or like categorically in different paths, if your test has like a unique name, then it's straight. You only want to apply it to one model. You don't want to require it on like everything. Yeah, the options that aren't very useful, but maybe at least, yeah, if you wanted, you could just give your model path like my model. And then that says that model requires that test, which is fine. Probably a better solution would be to standardize your data tests with a certain prefix. So for us, we prefix all our data tests with assert like that. So you could just say on the marts models, everybody has to have at least one assert test. So just starting with assert and then the one. And so that would be a way to expect people to go through the work of writing a custom data test for the model in some respect, if not. And again, if a particular model doesn't need that data test, then on the model, they can do like config required tests equals none. And that'll just be like, I'm whitelisting this model from that requirement that it has to have an assert test. This one doesn't require an assert test. And then in the PR, they can just leave a note on this line saying, I'm whitelisting this because whatever, we don't need a test on it, blah, blah, blah.
Nice. That's really cool.
Yeah, thanks for your question, man.